I know that before we go at 4:30, I will hear more stories. But I feel that today, those who have had the courage, as others of you have already done in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and others, whether Martha, Rhonda, Sandra, Orlando, Ragnar, Tom, Nicole, Victoria's daughters, and others that I have not said. And through the leadership of the Chiefs, Daniel, Chief Robert, Chief Calvin, Chief Alvin Sanderson, and Chief Alvin, Vice Chief Alvin Mostos, and our host, James. If I've left anyone out, I apologize. But I think what you have done, and this is what takes so much courage, is you've opened a window into hell. And you've called us to look into hell where you were. And all of us, from time to time, look into such places. But very few of us have to undergo living there. And when I looked through that window as I listened to you, more thoughts came to mind than I can say now. I can't order my mind enough. I'm overwhelmed. But I think that where John's Gospel says the light has come into the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it, your testimony is of those who were the light, and you have shone the light on others who may have disappeared, but who have not gone unheard and unremembered into the darkness, because you have remembered them. And therefore, they are still lit by your light. We have looked into hell and seen some lights, and the lights are here today. There are many more we've not heard. And the difference about that bit of hell is it was built by the church and in the name of the church. The grace that you have shown in saying it was not the church that did this, I suppose it is an extraordinary grace. I suppose I want to say that that's perhaps the only thing that I question. No, it was not the church that did it, but it was the church that permitted it. that allowed it, that turned a blind eye to it, and still does sometimes. And for that terrible crime, sin, evil, of deliberately, consciously, stupidly, because evil is stupid, building hell and putting children into it and staffing it. I am more sorry than I could ever begin to express. That is both personally and in my role as Archbishop of Canterbury, as the senior bishop of the Church of England and the first among equals of the almost 1,000 bishops in the Anglican Communion, the 80 million people. I am sorry. I am more sorry than I can say. I am ashamed. I am horrified. I ask myself, where does that come from, that evil? It has nothing to do with Christ. It is the rawest, wickedest, most terrible thing. To molest a child while you read them the Bible. How can a human being do that and look themselves in the mirror? I am so very sorry. And what does that turn into? I want to avoid what happens too easily at times like this, which is to over-promise and under-deliver. I want rather to under-promise and over-deliver, if by God's grace I am given the strength to do so. And what the promise I will make is that Archbishop Linda and I will talk about this and say to ourselves, how can we dismantle the doctrine of discovery, to use the phrase you use so beautifully? How can we do that in a way that it may never be used again? How can we make sure, not just in Canada, but round the world, because even worse, I know that there are other places where First Nations have suffered as you have. And I've heard their stories sometimes. Not many of them, but some of them. How can we make sure those stories are never forgotten? And that in all and every circumstance, this is my second question, I say with Archbishop Linda, no doubt we'll bring many others in and ask ourselves this question. And it has to be done with you. You can't do this to people or for people. It has to be done with people, in service. How can we make sure those stories are not forgotten? So that when someone in future years says, such and such a group are not good at caring for their children by our standards, why don't we set up places where the children can be educated? That people, even if that is in 200 years' time, that people turn round and say, are you crazy? Are you crazy? Do you not remember this story and what happens when you do that? That there may be some redemption in that you know that your stories will live and warn others. This summer, wrong term in this part of the world, what we call in England the summer, which is a rainy period between June and September, as opposed to the rainy period between September and June. What we call summer, we have a meeting we call the Lambeth Conference. Happens every now and then. It was meant to happen in 2018, and then 2020 and COVID came along. And we invite all the bishops from around the world. Some of them won't come, some of them can't come, but there will be a number here who, God willing, will be with us. And this seems to me a good moment when we can gather little groups during that time and say, how do we learn? How do we learn so this does not happen? And your suffering, and that of your parents and your grandparents, prevents others' suffering. But for today, as I go on listening to stories, I want to say, I will not forget, that I promise. I will not put it away. I will remember for some reasons, particularly being personal for a moment. One is that both my parents were alcoholics, and it was a violent and abusive household where I grew up with my father, who I discovered later was not my father. And I was away at boarding schools, but I had a grandmother who loved me. So did my mother, who's still alive, and she gave up the booze, and I discovered she loved me. My father died from it. I don't understand what you've been through. I think, sir, you said quite rightly, nobody can understand unless it's their lived experience. I don't claim to understand. But I do know what it's like to live in a household where you don't know what love means. And for that to be what you expect for all your childhood. I don't know what it's like when it's done calculatedly by an institution for year after year and generation after generation. And I cannot understand the depths of darkness that would lead people who've chosen to go into the church to behave that way. By comparison, why didn't they go into bank robbery or something like that as an honorable alternative? What sin and darkness is there within them that did that. So I've heard your words plunging into my thoughts and memories and heart. I can say sorry, and I do mean it from the depths of my heart. And I can carry that shame and the promise that is a limited one for the moment, but God willing will turn into something bigger, is that it will not be dropped, but I will seek first that we do not forget that there is memory, and second, that with Archbishop Linda we sit down and work out what is the right response that will make you go away feeling that apology and shame come from the mind and the action as well as the heart and the spirit. And with that, I will finish again by saying thank you for opening that window into our church-created hell, and by witnessing to the light that you were in that place, and you are still in the memories of those who suffered so terribly. And again, I apologize, I am sorry, I am shamed. Thank you.